Hello guys, and in the last video we have talked about data transfer object where we are creating an instance for each endpoint. For example, we had a create user endpoint that we had it previously as any, and we have changed it to the create user endpoint, create user instant object, whereby we only want the email and password and the user service knowing that it contains the email and password. And in today's section and today's chapter, we'll be talking about validation, more exactly about validation. And what I'm talking about validation would be getting data from the client. So in this case, this endpoint, which is create user, so email and password is fine. So when we create and send a request, oh yeah, before that, don't forget to start it first. So let's run our project. So npm run start web. So let's run it quickly. All right. So now when you go to the endpoint, specifically users, so post method, we will get email and password. So we'll send that. So send it. The moment you send it, it is okay. So we have received a new user, which is approved false email and password. But what do you think will happen when you remove email and password? So when you remove it, it still sends a request and it still creates an instance of a user, but without the email and password. But yeah, initially it will create an is approved false. But what we want is when there is no email and password, we don't want to create an instance but throw an exception. So what we usually do to validate this data, we usually tend to go to the create user or any endpoint, and for example we will say if for example we will check if there's email is okay, or if it's not. So if it's not, and or I'll mention if there is no data password as well. So if the password or email doesn't exist, throw an exception, and that exception you'll mention email or password empty. But that doesn't look that elegant, right? So what we will do to make the code much more elegant and cleaner, what we will do is we will use, and that's one of the best use cases of using a DTO, a data transfer object, is adding some decorators our create user. Similar to these decorators, we'll add some decorators to our attributes that validates the input from the client at before even calling the function. It will validate these attributes. So in order to do that, what we have to do is add some packages. So cancel the program, and what we'll do is npm install, and what we need to have is class transformer and class validator. So write this and make sure the writing is correct. We don't want you to have any wrong packages installed. So class transform and class validator. Oh, instead of saying and, it should be without and word, right? So without it. So let's install that. So npm install, and okay, I made a mistake here. If you've noticed, it's not called transform, but it is actually called transformer. So npm install class transformer and class validator. So now it should be okay. Post install. All right. So now you will see that, okay, you should validate here class validator and class transformer. So those two things that is what we need for validating our attributes from the client. So now what we will do is go to, for example, create user input. So we'll go to the create user input, and what we have to do is let us add, let's say import, and we will import from the class validator. So the class validator we have gotten from the package, and what you see let's just hover on it, and you will notice there is several functions. So there's array unique, contains a lot of things. So what we need to have is, for example, we want to validate if this email is an email, right? So there is a validator for that. You make an add, so a validator will just say is email, and if you hover on it, if you have an IntelliSense, it will tell you that it exists and it is in the class validator and it exists from there. So you close and open the parameter similar to what we have done in controllers and in providers. So now what it does is it validates if the email is a correct email. And what else do we want to do? So not only the format of the email, we want to check if the email cannot be null. So there is something called is not empty. So that's another decorator coming from the class validator, and we could cascade. As you notice, we could cascade, we could append each decorator on top of one attribute. Now for the password, we will do the same, except instead of is email, we'll be using only is not empty, but we want to add an additional decorator, and that will be the length of the password. So the length of the password should be minimum, let's just say 4. So let's say is length. I think there should be length. Is there? Nope. Should be length. Okay, it's, I think, yeah, it's max length, or actually minimum. So minimum length. So let's import that from the class validator, and the minimum length we will say it will be 4. So that's our decorator. So is not empty and minimum length, is email as in is not email. So that will be it for the create user input. So we will validate is email and is not empty. So now it should work, but before testing out our program, what we have to do is we need to add a configuration that mentions that you have to validate the attributes coming from the instance of the DTO, so the client. So whenever we get any data coming from the client, we have to validate, and the validation is based on the decorator. So what we'll do is go to our main.ts. Let me save this a bit. We will go to the main.ts, and what we will do is give a space between app.listen and const app, and what we'll do here is we will use app, and this is the application that is running the whole thing. So there's something called use global types, so user global types, and this is the layer that allows us to validate any attributes coming from the client. So what we will do is we will import something. So we'll import from the Nestjs common. So most of the stuff Nestjs common has it, right? So we'll go to Nestjs common, and then there should be something called validation pipe. So validation pipe, and what we will do here, we'll say, so within the use global pipes, we'll use new validation pipe and open and close parameter, and let me put the E in it as well. So now that will be it. So make sure that it is coming from Nestjs common, and it is called validation pipe, and this is the layer that validates the attributes or any instance coming from the client. So let's run it. So npm run start dev. So let's continue. Let's run it here. This endpoint. So what we'll do is first, what we'll try is to test out with an empty value, right? So let's just send it here, and it's supposed to show something, an error. So email should not be empty, email must be an email, password must be larger than equals to. So let's try it out step by step, right? So what happens when we just remove the password? Let's just send that. As you notice, it will show password should be longer or equal to 4 characters. Will it say okay with that? Yes. So it has created it, and we have done that really well. But another issue that we have faced before, and we are going to look towards too, is recall that we had an issue where the user, so this endpoint put is approved. He could do that without any issue, so he could just approve himself, and that's not what we want. We want to have something that prevents him to act like an admin, and only an admin can do that, right? So what we'll do, we'll go back towards our code, and what we will do is change something from line 7. So what we will do here, make an object. So this validation type allows us to have an object properties, and just give a space here, just enter. And what we'll do is there's something called whitelist. And this whitelist, what it does is it's saying that anything that doesn't have a decorator, like the class validated decorator, let me hide this notification. So anything that doesn't have these decorators will be forgotten from the client. So we'll just drop it. We don't care about it. So if they don't have this decorator, we don't care about it and just drop it. So what we'll do is we have to change a bit the update user because they don't have the decorators and we need the email and password. So we have to change that a bit. But yes, like let's just whitelist everything that doesn't have, so we drop everything that doesn't have this decorator. So we'll just say true. And that will be it. And now we have to change a bit our update user. So for this case, we'll do that again. So we'll import from coming from class validator. And in class validator, what we will add here is, so why do we care about, so we don't want to, so sometimes, so we mentioned that it should be an optional, right? So how it cannot be empty. It can be empty, but it shouldn't enforce it to be there. So the user doesn't have to add it as a must. It's just an optional, similar to password, email, password, and is approved as well. So what do is we will get something, several decorators here. So there's something called is optional. So we'll take is optional here. And we will take as well, again, is email. If they want to change their email, if they are changing, we could use the is email there. And we will mention as well minimum length, and that will be it. Now, in our decorator, we will add here is optional. So is optional, what it does is it's mentioning that this attribute is optional. So whenever he wants to add, he could add it. If he doesn't need to. So we'll add that as well for the password. So let's add that, and here as well what we will do is email, and this one will be minimum length, so they cannot do update, and then the update would have less than 3. So that would be similar to that. So let's just copy and paste to use update user admin. So we'll put that here, and we'll put that this one as well. And for is approved, we'll just use is optional. So let's copy and paste here. So now we have done, we have added our decorators here, and we validated is, we mentioned that you should drop anything that doesn't have a decorator. And now let's test out, let us test it out. So what happens is approved should be always false. So let's send, and as you notice, it is false. So we made it as an optional, so that's why it is still updating, but there is nothing that needs to be updated because we didn't assign email and password, and is approved is still false, so it didn't change. So we did our job, and admin can only change. To verify that, we will go to our next endpoint, which was in the user admin, and in the user admin we have ID application. So we'll create here something similar to that. So we'll just use that and mention application, and that will be a get method. We'll just send that, and in it says is approved. So this one works, but in this one it doesn't work. So let's, for example, let's just say false. So let's just invalidate it. It doesn't work. So we have done it properly. So that will be it in today's video. So we have restricted the data coming from the client, and any bogus data coming from the client, we are validating it using the DTO for the attributes and the decorators. And those decorators can be done anything. For this case, it will be email, and email we could have a decorator called is email that validates if the email is correct or not and is not empty. And for the optional purposes, we'll use is optional, is email, and minimum length. The other one, what we had to do is we had to go to the main.ts. We had to add the new additional layer that mentions that the moment the detail has been created, we have to verify or validate the data that we are getting from the client. And we also whitelisted any additional attributes coming from the client, so therefore they cannot approve themselves or they cannot add any bogus from the client side. So that will be it. And in the next video, next chapter, we'll go more towards modules. How modules. So in this one, we had only user module, but in the next video, we'll talk about more what happens when we have two modules and those modules require each other. So that will be it. Thank you and have a good evening wherever you are. Good morning. Mine is evening, so good night. Bye bye.